Good morning. The topic for today is central venous pressure monitoring. I am Dr. Rakesh from the Department of Anesthesia, Jubilee Mission Medical College. So, coming to central venous pressure monitoring, what do we do and why we are going to talk about central venous pressure monitoring is that we are going to go under certain headings and stages. The first one is what is central venous pressure, then why are you going to monitor central venous pressure, what are the indications, what are the complications, then what is a central venous pressure waveform, and how does it help us in helping to diagnose conditions in the patient. So what is the use or what is the clinical applications of using a central venous pressure monitoring. Now coming to what is central venous pressure, it is the pressure that is measured in the central veins close to the heart. So it is also a pressure that is what you measure it at when you insert a central venous pressure is done by inserting a central venous access catheter, and the tip of the catheter it goes and sits in the junction between the superior vena cava and the right atrium, and again that is from where the pressure over there you are able to measure with the help of an arterial central venous pressure transducer. So normally you know that peripheral veins, small veins, they have valves between them, but large veins don't have valves. So you are able to easily thread your central venous catheter. Now next is that what it does is it indicates the mean right arterial pressure, and it is used as an estimate of right ventricular preload. What it means is that because this catheter tip sits inside the right atrium, what happens is that what it measures the pressure at the right atrial pressure, and by measuring the right atrial pressure you have quite a good idea of how much the venous flow enters into the right atrium, and that is known as that is how you can estimate the right ventricular preload. And you know that the blood pressure depends on the preload, the afterload, and the contractility. So to have an estimate of the blood pressure, to have the estimate of the patient's fluid status and all, by putting a central venous catheter you can have quite a good idea of how much the preload is. So it reflects the driving force for filling up the right atrium and ventricle, and it indicates a relationship of blood volume to the capacity of the venous system. Now what are the indications of putting a central venous access catheter? We are not it is central venous access catheter is an invasive procedure and it has got its own risk. So you need to know the indications where you are going to go for a central venous access catheter. Normally you put the central venous access catheter in the OT, especially when you are doing major operative procedures involving large fluid shifts or blood loss, because you will be able to give fluids and blood at a much faster rate. Then also in the case of intravascular volume assessment, when urine output is not available or reliable. Basically idea is that if there is a good urine output, like if the patient is undergoing surgery for like a long duration like this 6-7 hours, so you normally what you do is you measure the urine output at the end of every hour. If it is more than 0.5 to 1 ml per kg per hour, that means there is adequate urine output. So the amount of blood fluids that you are giving to compensate the blood loss and evaporative losses and other losses is adequate. And it also good urine output also shows that the kidney is functioning quite well. So if you are unable to access, or if it's a short duration of surgery, if it's in which you are unable to estimate, if it's a surgery you are unable to estimate, you are unable to see, then you can use the central venous access catheter and the CVP reading as a surrogate guide mark for fluid responsiveness. Also, it is used in the case of temporary hemodialysis, especially in acute renal failure or even in chronic renal failure before AV fistula has been created. Also, it is also used in case of surgical procedures with a high risk of air embolism. So it can be used to aspirate intracardiac air. So especially in cases where especially in neurosurgical cases or in orthopedic shoulder cases where you need a sitting position, is where you are operating on a position which is higher than that of the heart, there is increased chance of air embolism. So you can use a central venous catheter. Rarely has been used to aspirate air. Then next is it's used in the case of where there is frequent venous blood sampling is required. So basically, if you need to get lot of venous sample, if it's a long duration of surgery, every hour you have to send sample to for coagulation profile or to know the electrolytes and all those things, then you can actually insert a central line and it will make it easier for venous sampling. Also, in the patient, you do put a central line, especially in burns patients. If they have burns in the extremities and all those things, it might be very difficult for you to get a peripheral venous access. So, in those cases, you put a central line. Next is that you are asking for temporary pacing, and then venous, and then you also use in the case of venous access for vasoactive or irritating drugs and chronic drug administration. So basically, if you are giving irritating drugs like potassium and all, if you go it to a small vein, there is increased chance of irritation or thrombophlebitis. So if you give it to a large vein, these are less, especially also for chronic use. If your patient is is a cancer patient, she might require chronic use of this thing. Chronic use of a long-term supplementation of chemotherapeutic drugs. So that is the reason. So what you need is that rapid infusion of intravenous drugs using large cannula. So what you need to do is that, so in these cases where there is a need of a chronic abscess, there is a need of a chronic drug abscess. So what you need, you will are going to have, you might have to put in a central line. The next is rapid infusion of intravenous fluids using large cannula. So especially when you have to give large duration of this thing, you will have to require a large cannula. So that in those cases you cannot use this thing. The next thing is total parenteral nutrition. Here what happens is that you are going to patients who are needing TPN, especially ICU patients who are chronic, you might insert a central venous access catheter. Now coming to insertion sites. So what are the insertion sites involved? So first thing is, you are going to put the central venous access catheter. So first one is internal jugular, second one is subclavian. You can give a femoral access, then you have external jugular, you have basilic and axillary. Then what is the common insertion site? Normally you always put a central line in the right IJV. Now right IJV is preferred because it is consistent, it has a predictable anatomy, it's aligned with the right atrium, so it's much more easier for the guide wire to go through, and there is also a palpable landmark and it has got a high success rate. So there is no thoracic duct injury. So basically you know that the thoracic duct goes through the left side of the heart. So when there is a greater chance when you put a left side IJV or left side subclavian, there is an increased risk of thoracic duct injury. So that is so then next thing is coming to complications associated with central venous access and cannulation. Now complications associated with central venous access and cannulation. So you have talked about indications, you have talked about the sites where you can put a central venous access catheter, and now coming to the complications. First thing is that while you are putting a central line, normally how you put a central line is that first you palpate the vein, and with the help of a blind technique or with the help of an ultrasound, and then you also palpate the artery, and because the artery is very close to the vein, and then you try to inject a needle and you put the guide wire through the vein, making sure that you don't hit the artery. With the help of ultrasound, it's much more easier than a blind technique to make sure that you don't touch the artery. So coming to this thing, so what complications is that you can have an arterial puncture with a hematoma. That is, if you involuntarily, if you pierce, might not pierce the vein, but you end up piercing the artery, or you might end up piercing both the vein and artery. Then it can lead to an arteriovenous fistula. The next thing is that hemothorax, chylothorax, or pneumothorax. So, what happens is that sometimes your central line, when you put the guide wire, or when you are injecting the putting guide, it can actually pierce the pleural cavity of the lung, and that can lead to pneumothorax, chylothorax, and hemothorax. Chylothorax, if it pierces the thoracic duct. Then it can also be nerve injury, especially if your nerve goes to brachial needle injection to brachial plexus, some of the nerves that are present in the neck. And also what you have is that air embolism can happen, especially when you are aspirating. If you make sure that there is no air, if there is air, you can inadvertently cause an air embolus. Then you can have a catheter or a wire shearing. So here what happens is that when you inject when you use the guide wire, when you are threading, there is a chance that it can tear the vein or the nearby artery. So that is catheter wire shearing. And because the guide wire goes into the right atrium, there is a very small chance that it can cause right atrial or right ventricular perforation. Then next is that what these are the complications while you are putting the central venous access catheter. Now what are the complications because of the catheter? The most important complication of the catheter remaining in situ is an infection. So normally you don't use a central venous access catheter for more than 1 week to 2 weeks. If it's more than 1 week, then there is an increased chance that the patient could get a bloodborne infection. So normally it is like first complication is thrombus and thromboembolism. Because of this catheter is there, it can lead to a formation of a very low risk chance of a thrombus or a thromboembolism taking place. Second is that infection, sepsis and endocarditis. Especially because the catheter comes and sits near there is an increased chance of infective endocarditis in these patients. And next is that while you are putting the guide wire, with the help, there is an increased chance that patient can go have arrhythmias. And also another complication is hydrothorax, because if it ends up piercing some other place, then there is a chance of a hydrothorax. Now, what are the other complications of central venous access? So these are the complications while putting the catheter, complications when the catheter is present in situ in the patient. Now you come to factors affecting CVP. You basically like Fred load, blood pressure, you have factors that affect CVP also, that is preload, contractility and afterload. Now what is a preload? Preload is the volume of blood in the ventricles at the end of diastole. So what happens is that diastole means that ventricular relaxation. So normally what happens is that the blood from the veins, they come to the right atrium, and through the right atrium they enter the right ventricle, and from the right ventricle they pass into the pulmonary vessels. Through the pulmonary it enters the left atrium, left ventricle, and then it goes to the aorta, and it gets spread to the rest of the body, and then it comes back. So so the blood pressure and CVP depends on basically three factors. So what happens is CVP depends on the preload, contractility and afterload. Preload means that what happens over here is that it is the amount of blood that is able to enter the right ventricle at the end of a diastole. Once the right ventricle has relaxed, the amount of blood that is present is the preload. So if there is a then next thing is that afterload. It is the resistance left ventricle must overcome to circulate blood. So basically the afterload is less, then more blood can go. The afterload is very high, that is then the blood pressure then that much blood will the heart will have to use a much higher force to push out that thing. So basically the blood pressure as well as CVP, it depends on the preload, afterload and contractility. And it also depends on the cardiac function, that is the preload contractility and afterload. It depends on the blood volume, and then it depends on the capacitance of vessels, and it also depends on the intrathoracic and intraperitoneal pressure. Now, normally, the coming to the interpretation, CVP, it is recorded either in centimeters of water or millimeters of mercury, and normal CVP ranges from 5 to 10 centimeter water or 2 to 6 millimeters of mercury. Basically, a single value of CVP has no much of a prognostic value. Basically, it is a trend. So you start a surgery and the CVP is around 12, and then if it goes down, that shows that the patient has you might have to give fluids for that patient. If it goes up, then there is a chance that if it's a CKD patient, increased chance of pulmonary embolism, so you might decrease the amount of fluids and all those things. Basically, the trend in CVP that has got a diagnostic or a prognostic marker, and it is a surrogate marker. Basically, with the help of CVP, you are able to estimate right atrial pressure, and you are able to estimate end-diastolic volume. Now, physiological consideration with CVP is basically the Frank-Starling law. The Frank-Starling law is not mainly means that what happens is that normally like the blood enters the right atrium, then it goes into the right ventricle, and when the ventricle is in diastole or when the ventricle is relaxed, what happens? The blood fills up, and once the blood is filled up, and then when the ventricles contract, the blood goes out. So what actually happens here is that the more Frank-Starling law says that the more blood is present in the ventricles, the more blood enters the ventricles, the more the muscle fibers stretch, and the more the muscle fibers stretch, then more is the contractility of the heart. So if only less blood enters the ventricle, then there will be only be a less amount of distension of the ventricles, so only less amount of fibers of the ventricle, muscle fibers of the cardiac muscle fibers of the ventricles get stretched, so the contractility will be less. But if there is more amount of blood into the ventricle, then the more the muscles get stretched, then the more it will contract, and that is the Frank-Starling principle. Now, coming to respiratory effect, what happens in respiration? So here what is happening is that normally what happens is that during inspiration, this CVP tends to fall. That is because of the reason is that when you inspire, what happens is that the intrathoracic cavity expands, so that causes more blood to enter into the right atrium or the right ventricle, and this causes a fall in central venous pressure. So that is what happens in inspiration. In expiration, when the intrathoracic cavity contracts, what happens is that there will be less blood entering into the heart, and that will cause a backflow of blood into CVP, that source arise. So normally what happens is that during inspiration the CVP falls, and during expiration the CVP rises, and therefore you always measure the CVP at the end of expiration. Now, what is Kussmaul's sign? Kussmaul's sign is that we have already talked about. We have told that during inspiration the CVP tends to fall, and expiration it rises. But in Kussmaul's sign, what you are seeing is that during inspiration there is a paradoxical rise in CVP. So what happens is more or less the opposite. Why you say it is paradoxical is that you are actually witnessing is not just a rise, but normally it is that during inspiration it is regular normal patient supposed to fall. What happens, it doesn't fall as much, and that is because of it is seen in the case of certain types of heart diseases, that is what you are seeing, and it is usually indicative of limited right ventricular filling due to right heart dysfunction. So then next and this Kussmaul sign is also indicative of right sided heart dysfunction. So also you can also see in the case of Beck's triad, that is Beck's triad, it's seen in the case of cardiac tamponade. In that, what you have actually is that you will have a rise in CVP, you will have muscle heart sounds, and you will have a narrow pulse pressure. So coming to hepatojugular reflex. So another thing what you get to see is hepatojugular reflex. Here what is you are seeing is that like if you are giving a sustained pressure on the liver or anywhere, what you get to see is that you get to see an increase in JVP. So basically a hepatojugular reflex is that a sustained rise in JVP of at least 3 centimeter more or followed after examiner releases pressure. Because of this vascular, if you especially in the liver area, if you put a sustained pressure, you can get to see a sustained increase in JVP. That is the hepatojugular reflex. Next is coming to fluid responsiveness. Normally what happens is that in the operation theatre, what do anesthetists, we normally use CVP as first one to know the fluid status of the patient, especially long duration of surgery. You are not sure that how much fluid you are giving. If there is a lot of blood loss and if there is a loss of fluid by evaporation, there is loss of fluid, so you need to have a good idea of how much fluid you are supposed to give. And if especially in certain patients with CKD and all those things, you are not supposed to give a lot of fluids. So in those cases, you need to have a good idea of fluid status. So one thing is that the CVP waveform is a good idea of fluid status. So normally what happens is that you know that during inspiration what happens, the CVP falls, and during expiration the CVP rises, as we have explained earlier. So if there is normally, but what happens is that if the patient has got less amount of fluid inside his body, what happens is that there will be more inspiratory fall in fluids. So what happens is that you have actually have is that fluid responsiveness takes place. So what happens in fluid responsiveness, that inspiratory fall of CVP more than 1 mm of mercury is highly predictive of fluid responders. So what happens is that if inspiratory fall, that is normal in normal people during inspiration, but if it is more than 1 millimeter, and then what happens is that you can have this thing. The next thing is that what if you are keeping CVP more than 5 millimeter of mercury, and so you have to keep for a CVP of more than 5 mm mercury in renal transplant surgery. And in these patients, if you keep the it's associated with good graft function in the first 3 post-op days. Also post cardiac surgery patients, CVP is more than 50, it's associated for poor outcomes. Like as I told earlier, CVP is actually a surrogate function. So therefore what happens is that in these cases, what happens, what you see is that you have the trend. So if the CVP is low, then that can actually mean that you can have a poorer renal function outcome. But if CVP is high, there can be increased chance of pulmonary embolism. Now, decrease in CVP is a relatively late sign of decrease in intravascular volume. As we told earlier, if you have a trend of a decrease in CVP during surgery, it shows that the intravascular volume is less, and then you will have to go ahead and give this thing. Now, CVP is a better measurement of volume status in anesthetized patients whose autonomic reflexes are abolished. That is why we are using central venous pressure. Is a measurement to find out the volume status of the patient, and so that you can give fluids if you feel that the CVP is low, and if it's high, you can restrict fluids. But it is not very much a foolproof or a very good thing. There are today, especially with goal directed therapy and all those things, there are actually much better ways of increased availability of non-available. There is with the help of you of other non-invasive and apparent measurements of preload and circulatory filling. And these, in course of time, will reduce the dependence on central venous pressure. Now, you have the central venous pressure waveform. The central venous pressure waveform consists of 5 basic events that can take place. The first, so basically, you have the electrocardiogram in which the PQRS cycle is present. So, in this PQRS cycle, when you chart the CVP again with that, you get to see the waveform which is seen in the blue line as shown over here. So here what happens is that during systole, during diastole, you can see the CVP waveform. Now if you look at the CVP waveform, there are actually two things to note over here. There are steep ascents and there are steep descents. The ascents are named A, C, V, and the descents are named X and Y. So now how this happens and what is the significance of this, I will come to explain to you. So basically you need to understand, just like an ECG electrogram where you have a PQRST, here you have ACB and X and Y descents. Two ascents, ACB and X and Y are descents. So what causes these waves and how it happens? So what are the mechanical events that causes this? The A wave, that is the first of the ascent, is caused by atrial contraction. When there is an atrial contraction, you get to see the A wave. You know that the atrial contraction happens in the case of an diastole. When what happens here is that when the ventricles are relaxed fully, that and then the next step is the contraction of the atrium. This contraction of the atrium causes the rise in CVP, that is known as the A wave. The second wave is the C wave. It is seen in the case of early systole. And what happens is that there is this tricuspid when the ventricle is full of blood and it starts to contract. What happens is that the tricuspid valve bulges into the right atrium, and this causes some amount of venous blood backflow, and which is shown as a rise in CVP. The next rise is the V wave. V wave actually happens in the case of late systole. What happens here is that it is because there is the systolic filling of the atrium that causes V wave. Then there are two descents, X and Y descent. X descent, it takes place in mid systole. What happens here is it is due to the atrial relaxation. Y descent takes place in early diastole. It is due to the early ventricular filling. Coming to each one, like I told you, the first there are three ascents, that is A, C, B, and two descents, that is X and Y. The first is the A wave. A wave takes place because of atrial contraction. So normally the atrial contraction, it takes place in diastole, and what clinical significance is that when there is resistance to right ventricular filling, in those cases what happens is that is in the case of tamponade or right ventricular hypertrophy or pulmonary hypertension. What happens is that when there is a resistance to right ventricular filling, there is a prominent A wave, that is the ventricle doesn't get filled, that is the atrial contraction. When the atrial contraction takes place, instead of blood going into ventricles, more amount of blood, it goes back, and it is measured in that this thing. So if you see a prominent A wave, what happens is that it shows that there is a resistance to right ventricular filling. Now if you get to see an absent A wave, it's in the case of the same way in electroencephalogram where you get to see an absent P wave. It is in the case of atrial fibrillation or atrial flutter. And you also get to see Canon A waves, which what happens is that in the case of ventricular arrhythmias. Now coming to the C wave. C wave is because of the isovolumetric contraction. So it's seen in the case time of early systole, and it is also called holosystolic Canon V wave. So you have 3A, C, and next one is the V. Now here in B, what happens is that the next it is because of the filling of the right atrium with venous blood. It's seen in the case of late systole, and there's a prominent V wave is seen in the case of AST. And large V waves may also appear late in systole. Ventricle becomes non-compliant in the case of right ventricular failure. Then you have two descents. So first descent is the X descent. Here it is because of the atrial relaxation. It is seen in the case of mid distally, and there is a dominant X descent in the case of cardiac tamponade. So in cardiac tamponade, what actually happens is that the X descent is very steep, but the Y descent is diminished. While as in the case of constrictive pericarditis, both the X descent as well as the Y descent is very steep. Now coming to Y descent. Y descent is due to early ventricular filling, and it is seen in the case of early diastole. There is actually, as I told earlier, in the case of constrictive pericarditis, there is an increased Y descent and there is an increased X descent, unlike in the case of tamponade where there is only an increased X descent and there is a diminished Y descent. So attenuation of Y descent is seen in case of tamponade, right ventricular failure, tricuspid stenosis. So basic idea is that, coming to summarize, basically individual CVP waveforms, they provide a unique diagnostic rules about circulation. You are not interested in a single value of CVP, you are interested in trends in CVP over time, and it can be useful in estimating fluid blood losses and guiding fluid replacement therapy. It is important to remember that there is significant normal range of values, and there is a small change in CVP may reflect a significant alteration in circulating blood volume and right ventricular preload. Additionally, used information may estimate how fluid bolus simultaneously alters CVP and other variables of clinical such as blood pressure, urine output, and so forth. So normally, from an anesthetist point of view, normally especially when you use a central venous pressure monitoring inside an operation theater, we use it for us to guide fluid responsiveness, and you use it to see how much fluid that needs to be given. So normally the best idea for it is urine output, but with that you also use a CVP, especially if there is a decreasing trend in CVP, then you might have to give more fluids. There is an increasing trend, then if the CVP is more than 15 and all, then you try to restrict the fluids and try to bring down CVP to more or less a normal value of 12. And also you also have these waveforms of CVP, that is there are three ascents, that is A, C, B, and two descents X and Y. So these waveforms, especially in the case of cardiac tamponade, what happens is that you get to see a steep X descent, you don't get to see a steep Y descent. In the case of constrictive pericarditis, you get to see both steep X and Y descent. Atrial fibrillation or atrial flutter, you get to see the absence of A waves. So on the basis of this, you are able to diagnose certain diseases. Thank you. Yeah.